The first place to start in this chapter is comparing between autonomic and somatic nervous systems. The effectors for the SNS is skeletal muscles, for the ANS it's cardiac, smooth muscle, and glands. For the number of motor neurons and afferent pathways, for the SNS, it's single motor neurons from the CNS to effector, and for the ANS, it's two sets of motor neurons in series. First, with cell bodies in SNS, an axon extending to autonomic ganglion. For the second, from ganglion to effector. For myelination of axons, in the SNS, they're myelinated. For the ANS, preganglionic axons lightly myelinated, and the postganglionic neurons are unmyelinated. For the neurotransmitters, for the SNS, it's acetylcholine, and for the ANS, it's acetylcholine or norepinephrine. For the responsive effector to neurotransmitter, for the SNS, it's excitation. For the ANS, it's excitation or inhibition.
So depicted in the SNS, this is the autonomic nervous system. We have two divisions, respectively. We have the parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest period, and the sympathetic, which is the fight or flight. Here we have the location of each one. In the PNS, you have them come from the brainstem and also the sacral, craniosacral, which is both, and they exceed from S2 to S4, whereas in the sympathetic, they go from the thoracicolumbar, which exceed from T1 to about L2. Illustrated here are the preganglionic fibers. You can see that they're actually a lot longer in the parasympathetic, which reshapes the effector organ, whereas they are much shorter in the sympathetic division. Concerning the postganglionic fibers, they are, in retrospect, much shorter in length here, and they are localized, whereas they are much longer here to compensate for that short pre, and they are very much widespread. Now, for the preganglionic fibers, the fiber synapses with few ganglionic neurons to pass to one single effector, whereas these fibers, these synapses with many postganglionic neurons that pass to many effectors. Now, the neurotransmitters we need to be aware of here are that in the pre and postganglionic fibers, they both release acetylcholine, whereas in the sympathetic, we have the preganglions releasing acetylcholine, whereas the postganglions release norepinephrine, and rightly so, as norepinephrine is responsible for the fight or flight division. Now, we have a lot of affected organs here illustrated in the middle of this region, and a couple good ones we should really go over are these illustrated. We have the eyes, and they both respectively affect each organ, yet differently. We have to understand that in the eye, in the parasympathetic, since this is rest and digest, we're going to really rest and digest with a lot of things, and that's going to be the central theme. We're going to have the eyes actually constrict, whereas the iris dilates in the sympathetic, and this is because of a keen vision. This allows the body to really have a good sense of vision, so that, you know, in just regular terms, we can protect ourselves. For the salivary gland, they're very much inhibited in the sympathetic division, because we don't want to experience hunger or salivate over in such a strenuous condition. Whereas in rest and digest, we're free to eat and salivate as we please. In the rest and digest, also heartbeat plays a factor. We have a slow heartbeat. In the sympathetic side, respectively, we have constricted visceral blood vessels, which increase heartbeat and pump blood vigorously, working the heart rate. Now, this allows us to work more vigorously and to respond much quicker. Also, breathing, we have the lungs. These are constricted in the rest and digest, and in the sympathetic, the bronchioles dilate, and this allows us to breathe more effectively during this strenuous period. The next we have the stomach, And we can definitely see why we wouldn't want to be hungry in such a strenuous condition. But in the rest and digest, as the name here provides for you, it actually takes a long time to stop eating and a short time to turn off. And that has also very much to do with the pre-ganglionic and the post-ganglionic fibers and respectively their lengths. Next, we exhibit the liver and gallbladder. Um, this actually releases glucose. This allows our cells, to utilize this free energy to accommodate for the energy needed for the blood, for the body cells. Here we have the intestines being very much stimulated, doing their job. That you really don't want your intestines working in the sympathetic division, because you really don't want to go to the bathroom during a fight or flight period. Now we can go on to the sacral area. Here we can exhibit the bladder and genitals, which differ greatly in retrospect that we are inhibited in this function for the sympathetic. You need not to utilize the restroom in the sympathetic, but in the rest and digest, your bladders contracts. For the last period over here, we have the genitals. This actually promotes erection, and in the sympathetic, it actually promotes ejaculation and vaginal contraction.
Next, we have the receptors. The first being adrenergic, which is affected by norepinephrine, and it includes alpha 1, which is virtually all sympathetic organs except the heart, and its response is excitation and pupil dilation. Next is alpha 2, which is located blood platelets, and a response is promotes clotting. After that is beta 1, which is primarily heart and coronary blood vessels, and its response is stimulation, increasing heart rate, strength, and dilates arteries. Next is beta 2, which is located in lungs, blood vessels of heart, and most other sympathetic target organs. And its response is usually inhibition, dilates blood vessels and relaxes smooth muscle, and also stimulates insulin secretion. The next is beta 3, which is located in adipose tissue, and its response is stimulation of lipolysis. The second receptor is called cholinergic, which is affected by acetylcholine, and it involves nicotinic, which is located at all ganglionic neurons and neuromuscular junction, and its response is excitation. The other is muscarinic, which is located at parasympathetic target organs, some sympathetic targets such as eccrine sweat glands and blood vessels and skeletal muscle, and its response is usually excitation and cardiac muscle. The final thing to cover in this chapter is control of autonomic functioning. The ANS is not usually considered to be under voluntary control. Its activity is regulated by CNS controls in the spinal cord, brainstem, hypothalamus, and cerebral cortex. For the brainstem, it regulates pupil size, heart, blood pressure, airflow, and salivation. For the spinal cord, it reflexes for urination, defecation, erection, and ejaculation. For the hypothalamic controls, the hypothalamus is the main interrogation center of the ANS. In general, anterior hypothalamic regions direct parasympathetic functions, and posterior areas direct sympathetic functions. The hypothalamus acting through the ANS coordinates heart activity, blood pressure, body temperature, water balance, and endocrine activity. For the cortical controls, it includes biofeedback on autonomic functions. Biofeedback is a way of becoming aware of psychological conditions such as heart rate and blood pressure, with the goal of being able to influence them consciously. And it ties in with the cerebral cortex and limbic system, which both communicate at subconscious levels.